When I was approximately 14 or 15 years old, in 1988 or 1989, myself and my family had 2 summers back to back in Algarve, Portugal. The first holiday included myself, my older sister, mom, dad, my aunt, and my uncle. The second holiday, the following summer, was the same people except my sister, who stayed at home. Both holidays were in the same location, and both times we stayed in the same little villa, which was owned by a business that my uncle was associated with. We believed that the accommodation was not only free, but a great holiday option for us all. The villa was situated about a 15-minute walk outside of a well-known Algarve town called Cadarovro. The first holiday, where my sister was also present, was event-free, and nothing unexplained happened at all. However, the second holiday was where I alone experienced the absolutely most terrifying paranormal event, which has stayed with me to this day. The villas we stayed in was all on one level, like most villas are. It was a pretty standard layout. The main door at the front led straight into the kitchen, and that led into the main lounge area. Off to the left and off to the right of the main lounge area were 2 bedroom suites, where my parents and my aunt and uncle both slept. I slept on the fold-out bed in the lounge area. Out of the back of the property was a small swimming pool. From memory, it was a very nice, spacious villa, probably worth quite a bit of money. Nothing happened for the entire 2-week period, except for on the final night. I often say thank God that we flew home the next morning, because I don't think I could have stayed another night. On this final evening, everyone had just gone to bed and closed their doors, and I had just finished setting up my bed, finally turned out the lights, and covered up. No longer than 30 seconds after getting into bed, I started to hear a tapping on one of the walls. I laid there trying to figure out and guess what it might be. I figured it was probably just one of my parents or my aunt and uncle doing something in the room, so I ignored it. I then hear the same tapping again, but louder. I sat up in bed and I tried to pinpoint where it was coming from. Peering across the dimly lit lounge room, it was then that the tapping started to spin around the room, as if the knocking was circling me, and as I sat there, this was naturally pretty unnerving, and I struggled to rationalize what was happening. It was at this point that the tapping had stopped, and immediately a wooden chair from the lounge room dining table made a scraping sound across the wooden flooring. It was the same sort of scraping noise that a chair would make if you pulled it out from under the table to sit on it. At this point, I didn't know what was going on, and being as young as I was, I think the fear got the better of me. I shot down into my bed, I turned around, I pulled the sheets up under my chin, I closed my eyes as tight as I could, but unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Next, I heard even more scraping as the dining room chairs were being moved, followed by a very quiet but very distinct shuffling noise, which sounded like shuffling footsteps. These footsteps got louder and louder as whatever it was started to approach me in the room. As it approached, I then hear this mumbling in what sounded like a guttural, low-key talking, but in a language I didn't understand. Certainly wasn't Portuguese. On top of this mumbling, I have suddenly begun to hear this terrifying, rasping breathing in and out in a very rhythmic fashion, the sort of rasping that someone with severe breathing difficulty would make. The breathing got louder and louder until it was right behind me, right next to my head on the pillow, rasping loudly into my right ear. Petrified doesn't even cut it. I was simply frozen with fear. I don't think that I could even turn around if I wanted to. This loud, heavy breathing continued for what seemed like a lifetime, but in reality, it was probably only like 30 or 40 seconds, and then it slowly faded into the darkness, and the room was left in silence. I laid in my bed for about an hour, unable to sleep, and I listened intently for anything else, but there was nothing. Eventually I fell asleep, probably through nervous exhaustion, The next morning I woke up at 6 a.m. The daylight filled the room, and I remember the sheer feeling of relief. The first thing that I did was I got up and I looked around the dining room table area, and sure enough, 2 chairs had been moved away from their normal resting positions under the table, and not just by a small amount, but significantly. I also checked the rest of the communal areas in the villa to see if there were any doors or windows that had been left open, but there was nothing. When my family got up, I told them all about what happened, and unfortunately, I was met with mainly skepticism, which I found a little upsetting at the time. To be honest, I think the experience affected me to the degree where I probably needed some form of counseling just to process it all. But of course, there was nothing like that available at the time. I have often tried to rationalize and debunk this event myself over the years. Did a wild animal get into the property? Then prowl around doing all of these things? Possibly, but it wouldn't have explained how it would have left the villa, as the property was secure, and more importantly, wouldn't explain the circling, the tapping, the knocking, or the mumbling dialect. Was it one of the family members sleepwalking? I thought about this a lot too, and I concluded it's just not possible, as I would have heard them opening a bedroom door, which was very heavy wood and very loud. And plus, there simply wouldn't have been enough time for them to fall asleep, as it happened very quickly after everyone retired to their rooms. A few people I've shared this story with have suggested that it could have been something demonic in nature, but I'm not sure if that would be true or not. An interesting fact to end on is that years later, I discovered this with my sister, who then told me that she was with us during the first holidays. She always felt uneasy sleeping in the villa lounge, and often would get up from hearing noises in the night, and she would go into my parents' room and sleep with them. She also told me that she was informed by my parents and my uncle that the villa property was built on an old former wasteland, and was actually on the grounds of the former mass grave and burial site. This was something they kept from me because I was so young at the time. I thought that was really interesting, and depending on what your beliefs are, it maybe could go a long way into explaining the strange events that took place that night. I was a senior in high school, going through a rough time, and with school and home life, everything was crazy. My dad and I had gotten into a fight, and one thing then led to another, and I went and stayed at a house owned by some relatives who were not currently living there. The bedroom I stayed in was attached to a bathroom, and it had a door at the other end which opened into a small hallway connecting the kitchen and living room to another bedroom. That night, I got a bit of a strange feeling. It felt heavy, I guess, and I felt afraid and just uncomfortable there. Now, this was a house I'd spent a good amount of time in before, and I even stayed the night, just albeit not alone. I chalked it up to stress from everything that had been happening, and because being alone offered the first peace I'd had in a long time. I'm still not sure that wasn't the case, but considering what happened in the morning, it may have been my subconscious warning me. So I took a couple of Benadryl and I went to bed early. The feeling was still there when I woke up for the next morning. I was standing at the mirror in the bathroom getting ready for school. That put the door into the hallway about 2 feet to my left. That's when I heard the door slam at the other end of the house. I jumped, but my brain tried to reason it was the air conditioner kicking on or something. But then I heard something running up the stairs. Loud, heavy footsteps. Definitely 2 legs. Definitely very large. But something was off. In my head, I imagined something very large and very long legs. It ran through the living room, the kitchen, to directly outside the bathroom. The whole time making noises that were not in the least bit human. It paused outside the bathroom, about 3 or 4 feet right behind me. It just stopped and cackled for several seconds, and then it ran back to the other side of the house, slamming another door before running downstairs and slamming the final door. I was afraid to look away from my reflection, terrified that I would see something. Eventually, I gathered up enough bravery to bolt out of the house. I ran through the bedroom, I grabbed my backpack, and I ran through the living room. and out through the front door without ever looking away from my target or processing anything in my peripheral. I've since blocked out a lot of the occurrence, but here's what I do remember. The noises it made. It sent chills down my spine. I never want to feel that again. I don't remember the actual noises themselves, just the feeling. I knew I was targeted. I knew it was enjoying my fear. It had slammed other doors as it passed, but it didn't touch the bathroom door. It knew I was there. Everything about this experience felt very personal. My belief is that whatever this thing was, and I do believe it was demonic, it saw my weakness. I felt incredibly alone in the world at the time. By only letting me hear it, I wasn't able to really confide in anyone. No one understood the sheer terror because they couldn't understand what I heard. I felt like it was trying to alienate me even more. It was trying to make me weaker. And when I realized that, I started really kicking myself in the ass. I started focusing on the positives in my life. And I have never had another experience. The house had been built within the past 20 years by another relative and had no dark past or no deaths. My parents moved into the house 2 years after this, and there has been nothing else that's happened. I have even stayed there, even alone, several times since, and I've never ever felt the same heavy feeling. The house has since been very open and inviting. My personal demonic experiences compiled into one convenient story, haunting every aspect of my life. If you've been keeping up with my posts, you'll know by now that a demonic entity used to not only follow me and my family around, but even some family friends of ours, and they've all had creepy experiences. For me and my family, and me personally, it all began in this house we moved into Tacoma, Washington. I was about 4 or 5 years old when we lived here, and some of my earliest memories were formed in this house. As soon as we moved in, we knew something was wrong. Each of us, 4 siblings totaling, and my single mother, we all had experiences, and we felt the evil that was downright wrong. My first one begins when I entered my mother's room, and the light was turned off. I turn towards the closet and I see a floating head wearing a cowboy hat with a blue tinge, as if it had an Instagram filter applied. The head raises a finger to its lips and whispers a shh and vanishes. I told my mother immediately. I was in tears and she just dismissed it at first. Little did she know there was much, much more to come. One night, several bad experiences happened to both my brother and I. I witnessed the TV turn on while it was unplugged before we went to sleep. As we were trying to sleep in our bunk beds, my brother in the top bunk and myself below, something was tugging on my brother's leg, trying to pull him off the bed. Obviously, this terrified us, so we went to my mother's room and asked to sleep in there. I'll never forget what happened. As soon as she said yes, we left to grab our pillows. The entire house began shaking as if it was an earthquake. At my young age, I remember thinking, was this the washing machine making loud noises and vibrating the whole house? In reality, the demon was angered that we were no longer vulnerable in our bedrooms, and it decided to show its all to us. My brother was 7, and I was 8 at the time, I believe. For those who are curious, this experience single-handedly caused my mother to finally believe that strange things were actually happening and that me and my brother had been experiencing terrifying things. This only prepared us for what more there was to come.